Pregnant at 12 and kicked out, her unbelievable comeback years later stunned everyone. Nikechi, only 12 years old, stood trembling in front of her parents, unable to meet their eyes. Her body was frozen, her mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Her hands shook as they clutched the hem of her shirt, the fabric damp with sweat despite the oppressive heat. Nkechi, her father, Chijioke, boomed, his voice harsh and unforgiving. The deep anger in his tone made the room seem smaller, suffocating. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Nkechi opened her mouth, but no words came out. The tears that had been building in her eyes began to spill over, tracing tracks down her cheeks. She had tried so hard to keep this secret from them, but now it was out, and there was no turning back. Her father's piercing gaze was too much to bear, the look of betrayal in his eyes cutting through her like a knife. "Look at her," her mother Ngozi spat, her voice laced with venom. "Shameless. At her age, she's already pregnant. What did I do to deserve this? Her voice faltered as she looked her daughter up and down with disdain. "How could I have given birth to someone like you?" Nkechi flinched, her heart breaking with each cruel word her mother uttered. It felt like they were both attacking her, throwing blame in every direction except the one that was truly needed. She wanted to explain, to say that she had never meant for any of this to happen, but the words were trapped, locked inside her throat. "I didn't mean to," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with fear and vulnerability. The silence that followed was deafening, suffocating. Chijioke's face twisted in anger, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Then, with a sudden outburst, he slammed his hand down on the wooden table, making the entire room shake. "You think that matters?" he shouted, his face turning red. "Do you have any idea the kind of disgrace you've brought upon this family? Do you understand what people will say about us?" His words felt like a slap to her face, each syllable heavy with judgment. She didn't know how to respond. Her heart was racing, her chest tight with a mixture of shame, fear, and sorrow. She felt as if the ground beneath her had given way, and there was nothing left but the cold, hard reality of her parents' anger. "Get out." Ngozi's voice rang out, sharp and cold. She stood up, her eyes hard, her gaze colder than ice. "We don't need someone like you here. You're a stain on this family. I won't tolerate this anymore." Nkechi's legs felt like they might collapse beneath her. She staggered back, her vision blurry through her tears. I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered, her voice a broken plea. But her parents weren't listening. Chijioke turned his back on her, as if she were no longer his daughter. "That's your problem now," he said coldly. "Figure it out. I don't want to see you here again. Don't you ever come back to this house." Her mother's cruel words stung even more than her father's. "That's right," Ngozi added, her voice firm and unsympathetic. "Keeping you here would only bring more shame to us." Nkechi felt the weight of their words pressing down on her chest. She had no place in their world anymore. She had been cast out, discarded like an unwanted thing. She opened her mouth to beg, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stood frozen, her mind a blur of disbelief and sorrow. Outside, the murmurs of the neighbors could be heard through the thin walls, their prying eyes watching through the cracks. "She's the pregnant girl," someone whispered. "What will her parents do with her now?" The judgment was palpable, a constant reminder that she had become the subject of gossip and scorn in the eyes of everyone around her. With a sharp, dismissive motion, her father pointed to the door. "Leave now, and don't you dare come back." The world felt like it was crashing down around her. She turned to leave, but her legs felt like they wouldn't carry her. She stumbled toward the door, her heart breaking with every step. As she stepped outside into the harsh light of the day, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. The street seemed unfamiliar, as if she had been transported to a place where no one cared for her. The rain began to fall heavily, cold and relentless. It was as though the sky itself was crying for her. But there was no comfort to be found, no shelter to run to. She wandered the empty streets, her feet numb, her body shivering, her heart heavy with the realization that she had nowhere to go. The streets felt colder now, the rain pouring down relentlessly, soaking through her thin clothes. Nkechi walked aimlessly, her eyes staring blankly ahead, unable to grasp what had just happened. She had been thrown out of her own home, rejected by the people who were supposed to love and protect her. Her father's harsh words echoed in her ears like a constant drumbeat, and her mother's cold dismissal burned deep in her chest. As she wandered, her heart ached with every step. The world around her felt alien, unfamiliar, as if she had been cast into a place where no one cared for her existence. The streets were bustling, but no one looked at her. No one saw the frightened young girl, the broken soul, lost and searching for a way to survive. Her feet ached as she walked, but she couldn't stop, couldn't stand still for fear that the weight of her reality would crush her completely. Nkechi had nowhere to go. The harsh rain dripped from the edge of the buildings, and the puddles on the ground reflected the dim lights of street lamps, their glow failing to offer her any comfort. She had heard the whispers of the neighbors, felt their judgment in every passing glance. Everyone knew. Everyone had seen. There was no hiding now. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness closing in on her. She passed by shops that were already shuttered for the night, the owners long gone. The sound of her footsteps was drowned out by the city's noise, honking cars, the distant chatter of late-night pedestrians, but to her, the world was silent. No one cared enough to stop, to offer a helping hand. She was invisible. Nkechi's stomach growled, the hunger gnawing at her insides. She hadn't eaten since the morning, but there was no food, no money, no way to buy anything. She felt faint, weak as the rain continued to pour down. She pulled her coat tighter around her, wishing it could shield her from the pain inside. The baby inside her stirred, but even that feeling, which should have been a reminder of her strength, only made her feel more vulnerable. She wandered past a street corner where a group of young men stood laughing and joking, their loud voices breaking the stillness of the night. They caught sight of her as she walked by, their laughter fading into cruel, mocking remarks. "Look at her. Pregnant at her age. Bet she's some kind of prostitute," one of them sneered, earning a few chuckles from the group. Nkechi flinched, but she didn't stop walking. The sting of their words hit her like a slap in the face, but she couldn't react. She had no strength left to fight back. Her feet led her to an alley, a dark, quiet corner of the city. She paused, leaning against the cold wall, her breathing shallow and labored. She felt herself sinking, her body trembling from both the cold and the fear. What was she supposed to do now? Where could she go? There was no one to help her. Not her parents, not the strangers who passed her by. She was alone. Nkechi's stomach growled, the hunger gnawing at her insides. She hadn't eaten since the morning, but there was no food, no money, no way to buy anything. She felt faint, weak, as the rain continued to pour down. She pulled her coat tighter around her, wishing it could shield her from the pain inside. The baby inside her stirred, but even that feeling, which should have been a reminder of her strength, only made her feel more vulnerable. She wanted to protect the baby, but she didn't know how. What kind of mother would she be? The thought terrified her, and yet something inside her refused to give up. Maybe it was the baby inside her, or maybe it was the small flicker of hope that still clung to her heart, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't just let herself die in this alley, forgotten and alone. The sound of footsteps approached, and Nkechi's heart skipped a beat. She looked up, her eyes searching in the dark. The figure of a man appeared in front of her, blocking her way. His face was hard, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a coldness that made her stomach churn. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low and gruff. Nkechi stepped back, her body trembling. She opened her mouth to speak but could only manage a weak, broken reply. "I just need a place to stay. Please. I don't have anywhere to go." The man narrowed his eyes, scanning her from head to toe, his gaze lingering on her belly. "You think I'm going to let you stay here? Get lost." Before she could protest, the door behind him slammed shut, leaving her standing in the rain, utterly defeated. The world felt colder than ever. Her breath hitched as she wiped away the tears that had begun to fall. This was it. There was no one to help her. She was truly alone. But even as the tears blurred her vision, something stirred within her, a determination, however small, to survive. She couldn't give up. She had to keep going. For the baby. For herself. With a deep, shaky breath, she straightened up, wiping her face and walking away from the alley, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The world hadn't stopped moving, and neither could she. The night stretched endlessly as Nkechi wandered the cold streets, her heart heavy with the weight of abandonment. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the chill in the air made her bones ache. She barely noticed the time passing, her only focus on putting one foot in front of the other. She had no destination, no plan, no hope. With each step, the voices from the street, the whispers of strangers, and the cruel words of her parents echoed in her mind. Shameless, they had called her. A disgrace. She had tried so hard to stay hidden, to keep the secret from them, but now it was all out in the open. There was no hiding anymore. There was no escaping the world's judgment. She was broken, and the world had no room for her. The city's streets felt more like a labyrinth than a place she knew. She had walked for hours, her legs aching and her mind clouded by the storm of her thoughts. She passed countless shops and homes, but they all felt like closed doors, places where she didn't belong. No one cared about the frightened girl in the rain. As she walked down a narrow street, she noticed a faint light shining from the crack of a door. It wasn't much, just a small bakery tucked between two larger buildings. The warm glow spilling out through the window caught her attention, and for a moment it was the only light in a world that seemed to have forgotten her. Without thinking, she made her way to the door, her feet dragging as she approached. She hesitated before knocking, unsure whether she should risk disturbing a stranger. But desperation pushed her forward. She knocked softly, her heart racing in her chest. She didn't know what she was asking for, just a little warmth, just a brief respite from the cold. The door creaked open, and an elderly woman appeared, her face soft with concern. The woman's eyes were kind, but there was a hint of surprise in her gaze as she looked at Nkechi, standing in the doorway, soaked and shivering. "Child, what are you doing out here in the rain?" the woman asked, her voice gentle yet firm. Nkechi opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. She had no explanation, no justification for her presence. She wasn't sure what to say. The woman looked at her for a long moment, her brow furrowing as she assessed the girl in front of her. I don't have anywhere to go," Nkechi finally whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, I just need a place to stay for the night." The woman's expression softened further. Without another word, she stepped aside and motioned for Nkechi to enter. "Come in, child. You're soaked through. You can't stay out there any longer." Nkechi hesitated for a moment, but the warmth of the small bakery was too inviting to ignore. She stepped inside, the warmth immediately enveloping her, a sharp contrast to the cold she had been enduring for hours. The smell of freshly baked bread and pastries filled the air, soothing her senses. The woman led her to a small chair in the corner, where she sat and began to undo her soaked coat. "Let me get you something warm to drink," the woman said, her voice calm and reassuring. She disappeared into the back of the bakery, leaving Nkechi alone for a moment. Nkechi sat there, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this safe, this cared for. The kindness of a stranger was a foreign concept to her after everything she had endured. But here, in this small bakery, it felt as though she had been given a second chance, even if just for a brief moment. The woman returned a few minutes later, holding a steaming mug of tea. "Drink this, child. It'll help you warm up," she said, handing it to Nkechi with a gentle smile. Nkechi took the mug, her hands trembling slightly, as she sipped the warm liquid. The heat spread through her chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax. The woman sat across from her, watching her with kind eyes. "My name is Amina," she said softly, "and you are welcome here, even if it's just for tonight." Nkechi nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She felt the tears rising again, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of fear or despair, but of gratitude. "I'm Nkechi," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Amina smiled warmly at her. "Well, Nkechi, you rest here. We will figure out what to do tomorrow." For the first time in days, Nkechi felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. Amina had opened her door, had shown her kindness when the world had only offered cruelty. And that was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The following morning, the soft light filtering through the small window of Amina's bakery felt like a blessing, but it did little to calm the turmoil churning inside Nkechi. She had slept the night through, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by warmth and the faint scent of pastries. Yet the comfort of sleep was fleeting, as the reality of her situation pressed down on her. She had no place, no home, and worst of all, no support from her family. She was still just a child, abandoned and pregnant, without a place in the world. Amina, always gentle and patient, had prepared a simple breakfast for her, a slice of warm bread and a mug of tea. She sat across from Nikechi, her face filled with quiet concern. The elderly woman had already given her so much, but Nkechi couldn't help but feel the sting of the world outside. Amina's kindness was a stark contrast to the harshness of the people in the city, and yet, Nkechi couldn't shake the feeling that her past would always haunt her, no matter how far she ran. As they ate, a few of Amina's regular customers began to trickle in. One by one, they greeted the elderly woman, exchanging pleasantries, and soon the small bakery was filled with the soft hum of conversation. Nkechi sat quietly, her eyes downcast, not daring to meet the eyes of the strangers. She could feel the weight of their gazes on her, even though no one had said a word. It wasn't long before the whispers began. A woman, tall and sharp-eyed, entered the bakery and paused, her gaze flicking to Nkechi, before quickly darting away. Her voice, though soft, carried across the room. "That girl," the woman muttered to her companion. "Isn't she the one who got pregnant at such a young age? What kind of girl does that?" The words stung more than Nkechi had expected. She could feel the sharp edges of judgment cutting through her. Even though no one had directly confronted her, a sudden wave of shame washed over her. She wanted to leave, to hide, to run from the eyes that seemed to follow her everywhere. But she couldn't. Amina's presence was the only thing holding her in place, anchoring her when all she wanted to do was disappear. Amina glanced at the woman with a sharp, disapproving look. "Mind your business," she said firmly, her voice strong and unwavering. "If you have nothing kind to say, then don't say anything at all." The woman faltered, clearly taken aback by Amina's rebuke, but she didn't respond. The room fell silent, and for a moment, Nkechi thought she could breathe again. But the damage had been done. The others in the bakery, though silent, had heard the exchange, and she could feel their eyes lingering on her, even when they pretended to look away. "I'm sorry," Nkechi whispered, her voice breaking as she stood to leave. She couldn't stay here, couldn't endure the judgment. Amina placed a gentle hand on her arm, stopping her. "Stay, Nkechi," she said softly. "Don't let their words make you leave. You belong here as much as anyone else." But the doubt that had been festering in Nkechi's heart came rushing to the surface. Would she always be seen as nothing more than a mistake? A girl who had ruined everything for herself and her family? Her mother's cold words echoed in her mind. "You're a disgrace." With a heavy heart, Nkechi sat back down, her eyes fixed on the table. She couldn't escape the truth that everyone knew what had happened to her, that she would always be marked by her past. There was no erasing it, no way to outrun it. The day passed slowly, with more customers coming and going, but Nkechi felt more and more invisible, the weight of the world pressing down on her with every passing hour. The bakery, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a prison of judgment. The days began to blur together in a haze of uncertainty and fear. The bakery, once a refuge, now felt like an oppressive space. The whispers continued, soft but constant, and no matter how hard she tried, Nkechi could never escape them. The judgment of the neighbors, the disapproving glances, the whispered accusations, they all seemed to weigh down on her with every step she took. Each time she passed through the bakery's door, the stares followed her, like shadows that would not let her go. Amina noticed the change in her. The once bright-eyed girl who had walked into the bakery with a spark of hope now seemed withdrawn, quiet, and distant. Amina did her best to comfort Nkechi, offering words of encouragement and support, but even her kindness, which had once been a lifeline, no longer felt enough. The world outside, with its judgment and harsh words, seemed too strong, too overwhelming. One afternoon, as Nkechi worked silently in the corner of the bakery, the door swung open with a harsh clang. A man entered, his presence commanding attention. It was Esteban, a wealthy local businessman who had a reputation for being both miserly and nosy. His sharp eyes scanned the room before landing on Nkechi, standing by the counter, her hands shaking as she wiped down a table. Esteban strode over to Amina, his expression cold and disdainful. "Amina, we need to talk," he said. His voice low, but filled with authority. He didn't even acknowledge Nkechi as he passed by her, but she could feel his gaze on her as he moved. She swallowed hard, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. Amina stood up, her posture straightening with a quiet authority that only came with years of experience. "What is it, Esteban?" "I've been hearing things," Esteban continued, his tone dripping with judgment. "This girl," he gestured dismissively toward Nkechi, "should not be here. She's a stain on this place, Amina. You're a respectable woman. You don't want the reputation of harboring someone like her." The words hit Nkechi like a slap. Stain. Disgrace. She felt her face flush with shame as Esteban's words seemed to hang in the air, piercing her heart. She didn't know how to respond. How could she explain that she hadn't asked for any of this? That she had no control over the way things had turned out? Amina's eyes narrowed, and she stepped forward, her voice sharp and unwavering. "You don't get to tell me who belongs here and who doesn't. Nkechi is a human being, Esteban, and she is more than welcome to stay in my bakery. If you have a problem with that, you can leave." For a moment there was silence. Esteban's eyes flashed with anger, but he didn't respond. He simply turned and walked toward the door, muttering under his breath. "You'll regret this, Amina. People will talk." The door slammed shut behind him, and the bakery was still again. Nkechi stood frozen, her heart pounding. The words "people will talk" echoed in her mind. She knew what would come next. The judgment, the gossip. It would spread like wildfire, and the consequences would fall squarely on Amina's shoulders. Nkechi looked up at Amina, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also guilt. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen. She hadn't meant to ruin Amina's life with her presence. Amina sighed deeply, walking over to her. "Don't listen to him, Nkechi," she said softly. "What matters is that you're here now. This is your place. No one gets to take that away from you." But even Amina's words, though comforting, couldn't quell the growing sense of unease in Nkechi's chest. She had seen the way the neighbors looked at her, heard the whispers, felt the weight of their disapproval. She knew that it wouldn't be long before the bakery became a target, a place of shame in the eyes of the people who lived around them. That night, as she lay in the small bed in the back of the bakery, Nkechi stared up at the ceiling, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She had nowhere to go, nowhere to turn. And the thought of staying here, continuing to bring trouble to Amina, felt like an unbearable weight. The following day, when Amina was busy with her morning work, Nkechi made a decision. She couldn't stay. She couldn't keep putting Amina's livelihood in jeopardy. She gathered her few belongings, heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to do, and wrote a short note for Amina. "I'm sorry. I don't want to bring you any more trouble. I'll find somewhere else to go." With trembling hands, she placed the note on the table and quietly left the bakery, stepping into the cold world once more. She didn't know where she was going, or what she would do, but she knew one thing: she couldn't stay any longer. As the door closed behind her, Amina walked into the room, her eyes falling on the note. She sighed deeply, her heart heavy with the knowledge that, despite everything she had done for Nkechi, the girl still felt the crushing weight of the world's judgment. Nkechi, now alone again, stepped out into the city streets, her heart aching with the realization that, in the end, no matter how much love and kindness she was shown, the world would never stop looking at her as a mistake. Nkechi's feet carried her through the rain-soaked streets, her heart heavy and her mind numb. She had left the bakery, left the only place that had shown her any warmth, and now she was adrift again, in a world that seemed determined to cast her aside. The note she had left for Amina weighed on her heart, but she knew it was the right thing to do. She couldn't keep being the cause of the problems that were slowly suffocating Amina's life. But the question remained, where could she go now? Her stomach growled, reminding her of the emptiness she felt not only in her body but in her soul. It had been days since she had eaten anything substantial. The hunger gnawed at her insides, but she had no money, no resources, and no one to turn to. She glanced at the narrow alleyways she passed, each one filled with a haunting silence. It seemed like the entire world had closed its doors to her. Everywhere she turned, There were reminders of the life she had lost. The laughter of children echoed in the distance, a reminder that she would never have the carefree youth she once dreamed of. People walked by without a second glance, too busy with their own lives to notice the broken girl walking through their midst. Her heart clenched with each passing face. She was invisible. She finally stumbled upon a run-down restaurant. The neon sign flickered, casting a dull light on the cracked pavement below. The smell of food wafted through the air, making her stomach growl again. But she knew she couldn't go in. The judgmental eyes of the world still haunted her every move. But the hunger was too much, and before she knew it, she had stepped inside. The restaurant was small and dimly lit. A few patrons sat in quiet conversation, but as soon as the door opened, all eyes shifted to her. She froze, feeling the weight of their stares like a physical force. The woman behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, watched her approach with a look of disdain. "What do you want?" the woman asked, her voice hard, devoid of warmth. Nikechi felt her throat close as she tried to speak. She could feel their eyes on her, hearing the whispers that followed her everywhere. "Please," she whispered, "just some food. Anything. I don't have much, but I'll pay you when I can." The woman didn't answer immediately. She looked her over with a cold, calculating gaze, her lips curling into a sneer. "You don't belong here," the woman said sharply. "We don't serve people like you." The words hit Nkechi harder than any physical blow could. People like you. It was a phrase she had heard too many times in her life. Pregnant, a disgrace, a burden on society. She wanted to protest, to tell the woman that she wasn't what they thought she was, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she turned and fled out the door, the weight of her rejection crashing down on her like a wave. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the chill in the air still cut through her thin clothing. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to shield herself from the cold, both physical and emotional. She had been rejected again, left with nothing but the bitter sting of rejection. She walked through the streets aimlessly, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do. The whole world seemed to be against her. No one cared about her. No one cared about the baby growing inside her. How could they? She didn't even care about herself anymore. Her mind kept racing, her body moving on autopilot until she found herself in front of a small corner store. The smell of bread wafted through the door, and she felt her stomach protest again. The thought of something to eat pushed her forward, and she stepped inside. But before she could reach the counter, the storekeeper, a tall, heavy-set man, raised an eyebrow at her. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice gruff. Nkechi didn't know how to respond. She just stared at the counter, her hands clenched at her sides. I don't have any money," she said quietly. "I just need something to eat. Please." The man eyed her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a dismissive grunt, he waved his hand. "Get out. I don't want trouble here." And just like that, she was thrown out again. This time, the pain didn't even feel new. It was the same old wound, reopened once more. She had expected nothing less. Nkechi turned away from the store, walking into the empty streets, feeling like an outsider in the world she once thought she belonged to. What had she done to deserve this? What had she done to deserve so much pain and rejection? She stumbled through the city, alone, with only the sound of her own footsteps for company. And though the rain had stopped, the cold remained. It seeped into her bones, into her heart, making her feel as though she would never be able to escape the darkness that had taken root inside her. In the distance, she saw a small park, a place she had often passed on her way to the bakery. The benches were empty, the night air still. She walked toward it, her legs heavy with exhaustion. She collapsed onto one of the benches, wrapping her arms around her stomach as though protecting the small life inside her from the cruelty of the world. Tears slipped from her eyes as she lay back on the bench, the cold seeping into her skin, her body trembling with the weight of everything she had lost.